All right, looks like we are live. All right, looks like we're live. How's everybody doing? Welcome back to Sasquatch Out of the Shadows. Obviously, it's 2021. This is the first show of the new year here. Hope everyone is doing okay, doing healthy, staying sane. We're here to have fun. As I always say, this is the best way to break up a Monday. Excited for tonight's show. Just as always, a couple of announcements. You can check out all the previous shows. This is the 39th stream, so we're definitely have a bunch of streams, which is awesome. It's been a lot of fun doing this, I think, since April. That's when I started it, so that's been fun. The last show before this one was end of December. We had Chad Lewis, Joe Turry, and Kevin Nelson on talking about their upcoming documentary, Creature from Big Muddy, about the Big Muddy Monster. Check that show out. We had a great time talking to them. Next week's guest is to be determined. We're still working on the details there, so I will announce that. But hope everyone is doing good. Excited for tonight's show. And last week I put out a video. Obviously, we didn't have a show last Monday, but I put out a video of my top 10 squatchiest places that I've been so far. Got a lot of comments saying, oh, how come this place didn't make the list, or you should check this place out. It was just where I've been so far. Obviously, I think there's plenty of room. I think that list will have to be expanded at some point if I make it out to some of these other areas, like the PNW and some of the other spots out there. So I will be putting out some new videos kind of like that, short videos, some exploration stuff in different natural areas as well. So not exactly Bigfoot related. We're going to do some other cryptids too. So hopefully you guys will be excited for that. But for tonight's show, really excited to have on a fantastic researcher, somebody who's been an author and a researcher for quite a while, since I was basically born. I think that's when his first book was out. Thomas Steenberg, he's a researcher from British Columbia, Canada. We're really excited to talk to him. Previously, we've had Leon Thompson on talking about British Columbia. Just a great place, very squatchy from what I've heard, and I'm excited to talk to Thomas about all that stuff. So without further ado, let's bring in Thomas. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine. Did you say you were born the year my first book came out?
I think you said it was 93 that the book came out, right?
No, the first one was even before that, the Alberta book. It came out in 89. But
okay.
How do I get feeling old nowadays?
Sorry about that. But yeah, it's crazy. It's I grew up reading some of this kind of stuff, and I have one of the books I have here of yours is Sasquatch, Bigfoot, The Continuing Mystery. Folks that can see it. Very, very cool little book. I read this one quite a few years ago. But it's just great about all that sort of stuff. And the other one I have on hand is In Search of Giants, Bigfoot, Sasquatch Encounters. And you said this one came out in 2000?
2000, yeah.
2000. Definitely, if you guys are looking into some stuff about British Columbia, check it out. And obviously, the man himself is here. So as we always start out, let's first talk a little bit about your background and kind of what got you into this subject. What brought you to where you are today?
Well, it all began with me when I was a little kid in the mid-1960s. I was a weird kid. And one day my parents brought home a hardcover Reader's Digest book from me and my sister, who's 2 years younger than I am. And there was chapters in this book on everything, hurricanes, volcanoes, and of course, earthquakes, and they had, of course, had the big section on the age of the dinosaurs with the old, beautifully done paintings that they now say were completely wrong. T-Rex standing right, dragging his tail on the ground and things like that. But right in the middle of that dinosaur section was a little two-page paragraph titled "The Thing in Loch Ness," with the usual three blurry black and white photographs. I don't know, a switch went off in my head. I must have read that 80 times. Wow. And pestering my parents for information. They got me a library card and going in. And I knew very young that I was never, ever, ever going to move to Scotland. So I started reading about this thing in Western Canada called the Sasquatch. In the United States, they called it Bigfoot. And I started concentrating on that. And when I got posted out with the Army, the 1st Battalion PPCLI, in 1978-79, and saw the Rocky Mountains for the first time, I basically told myself, one, I'm never moving anywhere east of here again. Huh. And two, if they've been seen in eastern BC, they got to be seen in western Alberta too. So what I did was I put an ad in local press in Alberta, because this was before the internet. And put out an ad, and it was very simple. Sasquatch. Anyone who believes they've had a sighting of this creature, please contact Thomas Steenberg and the phone number. And I didn't expect much result, but I swear to God, my phone was ringing almost on a daily basis. It was incredible. And that's how I was found out. Professor Vladimir Markotic saw the ad, gave me a call, and he kind of took me under his wing. Vladimir was a senior citizen even back then. He was in his late 70s, and he did the academic stuff, and I did the field research. And it's through him I eventually got introduced to the late Grover Krantz, and so forth. And I eventually met the late John Green and became good friends and colleagues with him, and the late Rene Dahinden and Bob Titmus and all the old guard, you might say. And I became good friends and did research with all of them. And I miss them a lot because they're all passing on.
Yeah, I mean, it's what an amazing legacy. You really interacted with a lot of the, I guess, giants of the beginning of this field, I suppose. I mean, from Krantz and Markotic actually is known as well. I know he's originally from what used to be Yugoslavia, as my parents were.
Croatia, to be exact. Yeah.
Yeah. So Croatia, what's now Croatia, I think at the time, I believe he immigrated earlier in the 20th century. Who knows? I mean, the borders changed so many times over there that. It's a mess, but I've always been interested in his work in particular because I knew he, similar background to mine. But people like Grover Krantz, and obviously British Columbia was a powerhouse in terms of John Green and other researchers in that area that I think just really put out some great stuff. Obviously, a lot of people know John Green and Grover Krantz being part of that sort of four horsemen of Sasquatchery or whatever they tend to call it. So that's interesting. But out of all those figures, do you think there was, or let's start out first by saying which ones were the most influential to you, and what was your sort of relationships, I guess, with some of those guys? Well,
the biggest influence to me was my late friend Rene Dahinden, just because of his drive and his unceasing quest to find the truth, no matter what. And he didn't care who or what stood in his way. He was determined that if the Sasquatch is out there, he was going to find it. And that was his whole philosophy. And I kind of adopted my personal philosophy by greatly influenced by him. And that philosophy is stick to the facts and never deviate from the facts, right?
Right.
I got most of that from Rene because that's what Rene was. Hook, line, and sinker. I'd like to say one of my chief accomplishments was getting to be friends and colleagues with all these gentlemen and never getting sucked into their personal wars, because half the time you couldn't get these guys in the same room together.
Yeah, right. I heard there was some tension.
Oh, there was a lot of tension. Rene was always suspicious of everybody all the time. And I'd like to say, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I love the late Rene Dahinden, and I think he loved me sometimes.
Sounds fitting for his character. Now, was he Swiss or Swedish? I can't.
Switzerland. He immigrated in 1955 from Switzerland, and he was a young man looking for adventure. He was working on a dairy farm in the Calgary region. Same region I got started in a couple of decades later, and he was sitting in a dairy farm in the kitchen with the guy who owned the farm he was working for, and there just happened to be an old radio playing there on the wooden table, with a CBC show talking about a daily, I believe, the Daily Mail expedition to go to the Himalayas and look for the Yeti. And Rene said to his boss, he said, "Gee, wouldn't it be something to be able to go along on something like this?" And well, the guy on the farm threw the switch on him. He said, "You don't have to go way over there. They got heavy big things like that over in British Columbia." And so Rene, that was it. And Rene pestered the hell out of him. That's how he got going. And he ended up showing up in Agassiz, and he went into the office of the paper there, which was basically run by John Green at that time. And it was Rene that got John Green going on all this, because Green always told me he did his best to try and talk Rene out of it. Because as far as he was concerned, the Sasquatch was probably nothing more than an Indian legend. and he shouldn't pay that much attention to it. But Dahinden wouldn't be put off, and Green started looking into things at Dahinden's urging, and that's how he got going.
Yeah, it is interesting. I find that, in Canada, it seems that a lot of the earlier research was done by these, or at least a few of them, these European guys that came over here, perhaps like yourself, saw those mountains and just thought, wow, there might be something there between Marketich and Dahinden. Even, I know Albert Ostman, the story as well, from Alberta. And we can talk a little bit about that too. But I did want to just read a quick comment here from Kevin Hamilton, who's a friend from Alberta, Canada. He says, for any of you wondering what the PPCLI is that he mentioned, it is one of the 3 Canadian infantry regiments. So that's a cool fact for those of us in America that are ignorant of Canada and Canadian things.
Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from there, I suppose I want to just jump right into some of the stories that I think make British Columbia one of the, obviously the originator of the term Sasquatch, but just very important to this subject in general. Do you want to maybe say a little bit about the origins of the term Sasquatch? Obviously, that's what my name of this channel is, Sasquatch Out of the Shadows, and a lot of people tend to view it as a little bit more of a scientific word than the hokey Bigfoot term. That kind of has a funny sort of cartoonish feeling to it.
Well, actually, so did Sasquatch. It originated on the Steenberg Reserve, which is just 20 minutes outside my door here. And in the 1920s, there was a Caucasian man by the name of J.W. Burns, who was an Indian agent on the reserve. To put it politely, he was a spy for the crown. But he was very, very well liked by the people there, and he definitely liked and respected them. And he used to write stories that appeared in Canadian magazines about life on First Nations reserves. And you can still find all senior citizens on the reserve today who say if it hadn't been for J.W. Burns when they were kids, they never would have went to school, because he filled in his time teaching at their little public school, and he was never a qualified teacher. But he filled in his time doing that. And as the people got to trust him, they started telling him, their old local First Nation legends and stories. And they started talking about this thing in the woods around the reserve that they referred to as Sasquatch, basically a pronunciation. The best way to pronounce it is take the word basket, drop the B, and add SAS to it, Sasquatch. And he misspelt and mispronounced the word when he wrote an article that appeared in Maclean's magazine on April Fool's Day, 1929, titled Introducing BC's Hairy Giant. He took their name Sasquatch and he misspelled it and mispronounced it, and he called it Sasquatch. And it's been known as Sasquatch in Canada ever since. It was basically a mispronunciation and a misspelling.
Yeah.
And through time, it sort of like overtook and drowned out all the other local names. Like before 1929 in Vancouver Island, you'll see the term Mowgli used a lot. And of course, the First Nation names, Bookwas, Sanquan, Almo, all that eventually got drowned out. Now, the American name came about in 1958 when Jerry Crew went to the Humboldt Times, I believe it was called, newspaper with castings that he made after he was shown how to do it by the late Bob Titmus. And a reporter named Andrew Gonzoli photographed him holding one of these casts, and the picture appeared in the paper. They never heard of the Sasquatch in Canada. They didn't know what else to call it, so they call it, the title of the article was Big Footprints Found. The Associated Press put Big and Foot together. Bigfoot was born. Yeah. So basically, technically, I like to say Sasquatch is the Canadian name and Bigfoot's the American name for the same thing. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It definitely. It seems as if the term Sasquatch really has, as you mentioned, not only drowned out the other ones, but I think to the general public, if you say nowadays, if you say Bigfoot, they'll have an idea what you talk about, as well as Sasquatch. They're almost interchangeable at this point in terms of the general public. We're talking about folks that aren't really interested in the subject at all from a peripheral or even a pop culture standpoint. But it's interesting. Yeah. And it did originate. I remember seeing pictures of, Sasquatch souvenirs from pre-1950s before that term Bigfoot really went viral as it would have back in the day there with the journalists kind of amplifying and the Associated Press amplifying the term Bigfoot. Now, British Columbia has some pretty interesting encounters as well, just in terms of one of my favorites, I think, and I'm really curious to hear your take. I know you've done a little bit on it as well, is the Jacko story. And I think a lot of people, maybe younger folks, may not have heard of this story. This is one of those tales that you hear along with the Ostman story and the Ape Canyon incident. It's one of those sort of prolific events in, I guess, if you were to put Sasquatch history, Bigfoot history, that would be one that would always be included in there. What is Jacko to maybe somebody who's never heard of it?
It's one of the classic tales. You always have your classic tales. Sasquatch feels no different. In 1884, railway workmen working on what was the still incomplete Trans-Canada Railway, just north of Yale, were coming back towards town with what it was actually a work train, a smaller engine, a couple of flat decks with equipment on it, and a boxcar or two, right? And as they were approaching the vicinity of tunnel number 4, they saw this figure lying on the tracks, between the tracks and the cliff face. They brought the train to a screeching halt, and the noise of the train stopping seemed to wake whatever it was up. And it started trying to climb the cliff, and it got sort of like trapped on a little ledge there. And some of the men went after him, and they pelted him with rocks, rendering him unconscious. They trusted him up, and they threw him in the boxcar. And they, of course, they signaled ahead the town that they were on their way with this thing, and the old telegraph, you know, that they were coming. And a good portion of the population of Yale at that time, which was around 18 to 21,000 people, there's only barely 80 people in Yale today. But back then, the gold rush was just recently ended, and it was a wild west town. So right. A lot of people were waiting for it, but they unloaded Jacko at the machine shops just outside of tunnel number 1. And the local doctor, Dr. Harrington, a man who did exist, I've looked at some of his journals and stuff, was called in to examine the creature, and he said Jacko was a rather ape-like in appearance, completely covered in hair. He stood about 4 feet 7 inches tall. He weighed 127 pounds. He ate all vegetable matter given to him with a relish, and drank milk with a relish. But he advised the men not to give him meat because he was afraid it might make him vicious. And of course, they had no idea what they're dealing with. And this is 1884, and Yale Town in 1884 was it was a bad place. I mean, you remember that HBO show Deadwood?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, they could have called that Yale Town, would have fit right in. There wasn't a week went by without a gunfight and a stabbing and a hanging. Half the buildings were saloon, another third of them were brothels. You know, it was a wild west town. Older people here in BC like to think the Canadian West was somehow more civilized than the American West, being part of the British Empire. No, absolute nonsense. In many cases, it was just as bad. In a lot of cases, it was much worse, the Canadian West. I mean, they had their own sheriff and stuff because Northwest Mounted Police wouldn't even come into the town unless they absolutely had to, yeah. And the men who had captured him were, the story goes, the men who captured him were going to take him on display to Europe and put him on display in a sort of a freak show atmosphere, you know, along with the Elephant Man and things like that. And there's no record of what happened to Jacko after that. He's just sort of disappeared from the history books. A few old stories, a famous First Nation chief, Kitsilano, claimed he saw Jacko being displayed in Vancouver. But I was never able to confirm that or find any evidence in the archives of the papers of Vancouver on that. There's another story that he was handed over to the nunnery in Bishop's Cove, and they shaved all his hair off, tried to bathe him in scalding water, and he died. But there's no confirmation of that story either. We don't know what happened. So it's indeed possible, and there's pretty good evidence that the whole Jacko story may have been an example of 19th century tabloid journalism.
Sure.
You know, they might have made it all up, but we don't know, because the newspapers in those days, they would use tabloid stories, especially in a slow news week. But rarely did papers share tabloid stories. Like, you wouldn't see it repeated in other papers. And mid-1990s, in the archives of the Glenbow Museum in Calgary, I found a Winnipeg Free Press article describing the capture of a creature near Yale, BC in 1884, and they're obviously talking about the Jacko story.
Sure.
So there's another paper that had it, and since then, 2 American colleagues of mine have shown me, one example, a Colorado paper in 1884 describing the capture of a creature near Yale, BC in 1884. So we don't know. The point is, if they were going to take them out, there was only 2 ways to go. One, they had to either put them in the paddle boat and go down the Fraser River towards Vancouver, because that was as far as the paddle boats could get up the Fraser River then. Put them on a train, because the Trans-Canada Railway the other way was still 1 year from completion. There was a big gap at Revelstoke. And so they had to go to Vancouver and take them out by ship, or they would have to cross the border in the United States and use the American Transcontinental Railway, which was complete. Now, the late Grover Krantz had a theory, and it's an hypothesis, but there's nothing to back this up. He thought if there was one man alive in North America who would have paid a lot of money for something like this back then, it was P.T. Barnum.
Good old P.T. Barnum.
Good old P.T. Barnum. And there was a story, and it is true, later on in 1884, P.T. Barnum started advertising a new display in the Museum of Natural Wonders called Jojo the Dog-Faced Boy. But there was never any pictures of Jojo published. And for some reason, after a few weeks, P.T. Barnum dropped it. And you didn't hear about Jojo the Dog-Faced Boy again. But P.T. Barnum, never letting a good name die, 5 years later, started advertising Jojo the Dog-Faced Boy then, and this time there were black and white photographs, and it was obviously a young man who had that rare affliction, where hair grows all over the body, and P.T. Barnum, sucker born every minute. That was his philosophy. He had him dressed up in Russian Cossack outfits with this wild story about these hairy people in the mountains of the Urals who rebelled against the Tsar and blah, 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 right? But Grover had the theory that maybe the original Jojo the Dog-Faced Boy was Jacko, and that he died and was just buried and was forgotten about. I don't know if I agree with that theory, because P.T. Barnum, it seems to me, creature dying, that wouldn't stop him. He would have stuffed the body and displayed it anyway, this is the guy who sewed a monkey's torso to a fishtail and called it the Fiji mermaid.
Right.
So I don't know if that there's any credence to that story. And again, as other people have concluded, they may be right. It may be nothing more than an example of 1800s tabloid journalism. But the fact is, it's a classic tale, and we'll never really know.
It's something so interesting. I think it happens in the subject quite a bit with the idea that, you have yellow journalism at that time period, which really, as you said, a slow news day, they would embellish details, maybe even make up a story entirely. Very possible. And then you hear a lot of these old stories, and I have newspaper clippings from across the country describing wild men, or later gorillas. When gorillas became known to the public, that's what they would describe encounters with. And it makes you wonder at the time as well. Obviously, people didn't deal with things like mental illness and some of these rare congenital diseases like that, with one with the hair. And I think it's nicknamed like the werewolf syndrome or something like that. So you can imagine people like this that maybe were shunned from society because they were different. They were not normal. Obviously, they didn't deal with it as we do now. They took their refuge was the woods, and they became these hairy, wild, or just these wild people. Maybe that's some of what we're dealing with, but maybe there is a little bit of stories of the grassman or the wild man up here in New England. There's a lot of logging stories of them encountering, 8-foot tall, hairy, wild-like men. I mean, it's difficult to describe what that may be.
I think it's very possible. In my opinion, I'm strictly zoological in my approach to the Sasquatch. To me, I think what we're dealing with, assuming that it does exist, and I do believe it does.
Right.
Matter of fact, I'm 90% convinced it does. I leave 10% off in case I'm wrong. Okay. I think if the Sasquatch does indeed exist, what we're dealing with is a higher primate, an unclassified higher primate. And I think in the eastern part of the continent, a lot of the old stories of wild men and stuff may have been of other things absolutely non-related to the Sasquatch. But John Green and Dahinden and people back in the 50s and 60s heard these stories. They just automatically lumped them in with Sasquatch. Right. When in some cases, they may be dealing with something completely different. Who knows? We may never know.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting point. I mean, one I can think of is there was a in the state of Connecticut where there's this famous case, the Winstead Wildman, where a creature was described as picking blueberries and scaring a man and his bulldog, I believe in 1895. And it was described as a hairy creature, and there was a monster hunt that went after it. That may have been a Sasquatch-like story, but there was a guy who was kind of a hermit who wore a leather outfit. I think they called him Leatherman or something along those lines, around that same time, who would go from these different little cave abodes, and he would travel around, and people would go and search for him, and it became almost like a pastime to look for the Leatherman. He was just this sort of hermit that did his thing up in the woods. And I've seen that story sometimes lumped in with Sasquatch stories in the New England area. And I thought that's kind of interesting, because clearly it was described as a human being who just wore an eccentric outfit and lived this very strange lifestyle. Whether or not something was wrong with him or not, I'm not sure. But that's a very interesting point you bring up, because I know a lot of people will point to some of those old stories and automatically and say that's definitely evidence of Sasquatch pre, the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to read a quick comment here from, let's see if I can find it, from Bigfoot Okanagan. That's Leon, of course. He says, "Evening, Alex and Thomas, the Sasquatch archiver of the world." How you doing, Leon? Yeah,
I
Thomas
keep telling him to
definitely
change
knows his stuff.
I keep telling him to change his group's name to Sasquatch Okanagan, but anyway.
Once you get the name started, it's tough to get rid of it.
Yeah, tough to stop. Yeah.
Right. So before I continue with questions, I see that there's some great audience questions starting to roll in. So if you'd like, I can start taking some audience questions. What do you think?
Sure. Let's concentrate on the audience on the show. Yeah.
All right, absolutely. Let's see. Dave DeRoy asks, what is the next milestone that must be met in order for the topic of Sasquatch/Bigfoot to move forward? Is there an answer to a body? Why making contact not be the first step?
I think a great, a good, clear video, or well, it have to be video. No one uses whole movies anymore, but video footage that's at least Patterson Gimlin quality or better. That would probably get a lot of people thinking. It wouldn't prove it, but we get a lot of people thinking. The great step that will get the Sasquatch recognized and into the realm of everyday zoology and out of cryptozoology would be when science gets what science has always demanded. And they're always unanimous on that. They need a body or piece of a body. Nothing else will do, or sufficient skeletal remains. And I'm afraid no amount of politically correct wishful thinking will ever change it, because that's just the way the system works.
Sure.
Yeah, that's just the way it works. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of people who would say, that's the unfortunate truth. Obviously, with some other zoological discoveries, there's been, like you said, some video evidence, I think, of some primates in parts of Africa where they've been able to get a few pieces of video and say, well, this is a different primate, this is a different monkey than we previously thought, or something along those lines. So it's possible, but for something this, as they say, the bolder the claim, the more you need evidence, basically, the more solid.
Absolutely. No amount of video is ever going to prove the existence of the Sasquatch. Well, it may get a lot of people asking questions and turning heads, and maybe even jumpstart a few serious, inquiries into the matter.
Absolutely, it'd be great. I mean, I imagine a great video, and then a university decides to put a few $1 million into a project, or you name an organization. It'd be very interesting.
I mean, let's face it. If the Sasquatch is ever proven to exist, and it's confirmed, and it's now in the realm of everyday zoology, all these scientists and organizations that denied its existence for the last 40 years will say, we kind of suspected it was there all along.
Yeah, you guys that are researching it, you're still crazy,
Yeah.
Oh boy. Anyway, Stefan, how you doing, Stefan? He asked, Thomas and Alex, what cryptozoology New Year's resolutions do you have? Any projects you hope to start or finish?
I just wish this COVID stuff would end, so me and people I can go with could get together and head back out in the bush. I mean, I still go. But I try to avoid contact with as many people as possible. Sure. Yeah. New Year's resolution, I just carry on. If you asked me back in 1978, would we still be looking at 2021? I would have said, well, no, you're nuts. We've got to find an answer by then.
Sure,
Well,
sure.
here we go. Here we go. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh man, yeah. In terms of New Year's resolutions, I don't really usually do them. I don't know. As you said, kind of carry on. But
Just another year. No, just another year. The only thing I thought of in New Year's was, thank God 2020 is over with, because it really sucked.
yeah, it was definitely a tough one.
I hated it. Yeah.
As for projects, start or finish, I've got a few projects kind of lined up. I'm going to be talking about those coming up soon, relating to this topic, of course, Sasquatch. More videos for this channel, that sort of thing. That's pretty much part of it, but definitely a lot of things on the horizon. I see Dave has asked a bunch of questions. I will come back to some of your other questions, Dave, but I'm just going to give some other people turns. So Quick Witty asked an interesting one. Now, I was going to ask you about this because I've heard you talk about it before. Quick Witty asked, was Patterson a con man?
Yes.
So this is interesting. So Patterson, obviously the Patterson-Gimlin film.
No, the Patterson-Gimlin film is authentic as far as I'm concerned. Yep. I'm just talking about the man,
sure.
Roger Patterson. I never met him. He died in 1972 of a Hodgkin's lymphoma. And but I've been good friends with Bob Gimlin for close to 30 years now. But what I know and learned of him in the Yakima area, do you remember an old show on television called Green Acres?
That may be a little...
Yeah, it's a comedy show. There was a character in that show called Mr. Haney. And Roger Patterson sort of, in Yakima, sort of fit into that category. Everybody knew him. Most people liked him, but everybody also knew, for God's sakes, don't give him any money because you'll never get it back.
Oh, yeah.
That's what Roger Patterson was. He was an inventor. He hated working for other people. He liked living off his inventions and, and just carrying on that sort. That was Roger Patterson. He was only 5 feet 2 inches tall. He was a very small man, but incredibly fit and athletic. And he probably would have lived a long, healthy life if he hadn't had Hodgkin's lymphoma, which killed him eventually.
Right.
And when he got the film, he spent all his time and what money he made from the film trying to do it again. So to me, I think the film and Roger Patterson, actually, if the Sasquatch does exist, I believe Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin encountered one on October 20th, 1967. Okay. Right. If it doesn't exist, well, then it's the best hoax ever pulled on the North American public by private individuals ever. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think people are so quick to assume it's just black and white. It's either fake.
But to answer the man's questions on a personal level, yes. I don't know. Conman's a little harsh, I guess. Roger was Roger. I mean, he was, like I said, Mr. Haney from Green Acres. Everyone knew him. Most people liked him. A lot of people loved him, but they all knew, don't give him any money because you'll never, ever get it back.
Right. Yeah, I think people use that reputation that he had as evidence that the Patterson-Gimlin film is a fake. And I think that's unfortunate because it's just not as black and white. There's obviously those circumstances behind there that sure maybe are suspicious, but just because there was that suspicion doesn't mean they couldn't have encountered something legitimate. I don't know.
Funniest thing, since the first 30 years after the Patterson-Gimlin film was shot, it was people trying to prove it was real. 30 years after that, it's been the other way around. They're still trying to prove it's a fake, and they have still failed.
Yeah. It always amazes me the fact that piece of video has been, analyzed as second to only the Zapruder film of JFK being assassinated. There's really
it's probably the second.
Anything.
Yeah, the second most famous home movie ever shot, in my opinion. Probably next to the Zapruder film. And the Patterson film was 16 millimeter, where the Zapruder film was 8 millimeter. It was shot with a Cine Kodak K100, which was an outdated and discontinued camera in 1967. There's still a lot of them available. And Roger rented it from a shop in Yakima, Shepherd's Camera Shop to be exact. And we've never been able to find out. They had no idea the serial number or anything because Roger failed to return the camera. And he was actually arrested And he had to give it back, but the camera at the shop has no idea whatever happened to the original camera, and we don't know the serial number. It's even a mathematical possibility the one I have may be the camera. I doubt it, but I have the exact same type camera, and we'll never know what the actual camera, which camera it was. It may have been ended up in a junkyard somewhere, but even in '67, there were still a lot of them available, but they had discontinued that type, producing that type of camera, I believe, in 1965. Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, it really is interesting. Now, Bill, thank you for that super chat. Now, here, let's take a question from Kevin, Canadian Kevin. I guess that's your nickname now, Kevin. I've recently heard a theory that says BC Sasquatch are smaller than Alberta ones. Is there merit to this theory, in your opinion? If so, why the size difference?
No, I don't think it's I spent a lot of years in Alberta, and I spent, of course, a lot of years since 2002 in the west coast of British Columbia. I think the animals in Alberta would have to be a hardier breed of animal, because to get through an Alberta winter, you got to be tough. On the west coast, it's more rain than anything else. I think that comes from, there was a whole rash of incidents between 1948 and 1984 in and around Abraham Lake, and before the lake was constructed there, the Bighorn Dam site, of extremely tall height reports, 12 feet, 13 feet, and in one case, 15 feet tall. I always assume, as most people do, that so when someone sees an extremely tall height report, they're exaggerating the excitement of the moment, you know. But it always struck me as interesting as how all these Alberta extreme height reports were all within an 80-mile radius around the Bighorn Dam site. And that they started in, the first one I heard of was 1948, and the last one was 1984. After that, and even during that period of time, there were also reports of normal height, you know, 6, 7, 8 feet tall. But for some reason, the extreme height reports stopped, at least as far as I know, stopped in 1984, whereas normal height reports carried on. But we've had extreme height reports here just a couple of years ago, just west here of Mission, a fellow coming back from a party in 2012, an end of the world party. You remember the Mayan calendar and all that stuff? He was coming back, and he saw this thing get up on the side of the road and walk into someone's yard over a large overhang. And he said that thing had to duck slightly to get under the overhang. That overhang is 12 feet high. So, yeah, we get extreme tall reports occasionally. I think if the Sasquatch does exist, it's no more unique than human beings. You know, most human beings are, you know, men are, you know, 5'11" to 6 feet, but every now and then you get someone who's 7.5 feet tall, you know, look at the NBA.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. So maybe every now and then one does grow bigger. Who knows? Yeah, but I don't think in answer to the gentleman's question, no, I don't think there are, it's normal for a Sasquatch in Alberta to be bigger or taller than those seen in British Columbia. One difference I did notice was, and my stats may have completely changed them since then, there were a lot more reports of jet black creatures in Alberta, whereas brownish black was most often reported in BC. But right along the BC-Alberta border, they were the same. There were jet black there, jet black on this side of the line, that line. And when you got more close to the west coast, you seemed to get more brownish black or grayish. And every now and then you had a reddish brown, like orangutan color reported. But had a few of those in Alberta as well.
Have you noticed, has there been any correlation between terrain or anything like that, or any ideas why there may be such a variation in color?
Forest regions and the mountains. Yeah. Anywhere that has, as far as I'm concerned, has a healthy black bear population, you can have a Sasquatch. Yeah. If it can support bears, it can support a Sasquatch.
Right. Now, Dr. Anonymous says, hi, can we meet and show a couple videos? My dad, Nigel, you gave him your card so I could tell you my encounters. I don't know if that, I believe that's for you. I don't know if that's for you or me, Dr. Anonymous.
Well, Dr. Anonymous, give me a phone call, 604-826-6150.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if that's who that's for. But anyway, moving on.
But before you do, Dr. Anonymous, have a note any video or footage or photograph footage where you have to point and draw circles around it and tell me what I'm supposed to be looking at as evidence, it's just gone out the window, even if it was a Sasquatch. Yeah.
Oh boy, yeah, that's quite an affliction online.
Yeah.
But moving on, Jordan Warner, good buddy, he says, question, great show, Alex. How often does Thomas deal with discouragement dealing with the pursuit of Sasquatch? What motivates his quest to keep pushing on? Great question. Thanks, Jordan.
Stubbornness, pig-headedness, but as my ex-wife often put it, inherited idiocy.
Sure.
Yeah. No, I just want to know. I gave up trying to prove, having a goal of proving the existence of Sasquatch to the world a long time ago. I want to know. I want to know if all these years of looking, the thing I actually saw in 2004 was a Sasquatch or not. Right. I don't know. I saw a figure. It was jet black in color. But like I said, stick to the facts, every deviant facts. He was almost a mile away on the cut line. It could have been a big odd man way up there, but what he was doing up there, I have no idea. So I don't know. I saw a figure. If that was a Sasquatch, I have actually seen one. If it was not a Sasquatch, I still have not. But am I ever discouragement? Oh, usually about 8 or 9 times a day. But I just put that aside and carry on. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So Dr. Anonymous followed up and said, cheers was for Thomas. Take care, guys. Awesome. Okay, so I guess they will make contact with you. That's awesome. I'm glad to see somebody that's tuning in has something to share with you. I hope that turns out to be something interesting. Now, Glenn H. asks, if you were in fact to come in contact with Sasquatch remains, what would you do with them? Who would you trust to turn them over to for proper research? Interesting question.
If I found the remains of a Sasquatch in the bush, is he getting at? If I found the remains of a Sasquatch after photographing and videotaping all, I'm assuming you're talking about skeletal remains.
Right.
I would, and if I found a whole carcass, well, you obviously of its size and stuff, and I'm an individual in his own time and his own money, and I don't have access to a Chinook helicopter at $1,000 an hour with cargo nets, I would remove the head, hands, and feet and bring them in. Who do I trust the most to turn them over and get involved with? Well, Dr. Jeff Meldrum seems the logical choice now after the death of my good friend, John Bindernagel, because he has connections in the scientific world. And it's going to take a while. I mean, anyone who thinks it's going to be overnight, it's not. Right. It's going to take weeks for them to look at it, get others interested enough to look at it, and then the ball gets rolling, the Ferris wheel starts to turn. Some politicians say, do we need to protect these things? And then that ball starts rolling, and that's just how the game goes. So if I found the remains of a Sasquatch tomorrow, it probably wouldn't be confirmed at most, or for at least, even with them looking at it, for 2 years. You know, because that's just the way the machine works.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But to answer the question, my best contact now for getting involved in this would have to be Dr. Jeff Meldrum. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we live in this hyper kind of everything gets solved right away kind of world. You need to know right away. The internet has shortened our attention span. So people think, you find Sasquatch, it's going to be tomorrow. We're all going to know about it. But often the scientific process doesn't happen overnight, as you mentioned. So I think that's definitely an interesting point. A lot of people assume, the government will swoop in and take it and all that's involved with that. But I think there's, as long as you abide by the proper scientific protocol, documenting it, and then contacting somebody you trust, and that's probably a good way to go about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I used to have so many contacts, Grover Krantz, Vladimir Markotic, Dr. John Bindernagel, but those gentlemen have all passed away. The only one really left that I'm aware of that I have contact with would be Dr. Jeff Meldrum. And then there's a problem. He's in Idaho and I'm in Canada.
Right.
I mean, I can't imagine saying, "Hey, Jeff, let's try to take this across the border and see what happens." Yeah, sure, okay, no problem.
Make it an international incident.
Yeah. What do you got? We have the remains of a Sasquatch. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, guys. Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead, Spark. You have a nice day.
Yeah, right.
It's not going to work. It's not going to work that way. I'm going to have to get someone here at the University of British Columbia or something interested and get it, preserve the remains preserved and stuff. And of course, Melvin will be up here as fast as he could if he crossed the border. Right now, he can't because of COVID.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And the ball will get rolling, and they'll start looking at it, and slowly and surely, and of course they got to cover their butts. And you say, well, listen, did I ever say anything about this being nonsense 5 years ago? And, because like I said, they'll probably say, well, we kind of suspected they were there all along, and that's how the ball will get rolling. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. Now you mentioned Dr. Bindernagel. His first book is one of my favorites, just on the subject, because it reads like a wildlife guide. I could read it with my Audubon Society and other books, just hand in hand. Amazing. You got to know him a little bit and work with him. I mean, I'm just curious what you thought of his research and everything, because he seems like just a fantastic researcher.
He was a fantastic professor, is what he was, and a scientist. And he was curious, and he actually took the time to look at the evidence and examine it, and it convinced him that there was probably a positive answer to this mystery in the affirmative. And when he found tracks himself and looked into it in Strathcona Park on Vancouver Island, well, that really got him going. Yeah, I met him first along with John Green, because he used to come over to the mainland, because he was on Vancouver Island in Courtenay. He'd come over to the mainland, and I'd meet up with him and at John's house in Harrison Hot Springs, and we'd go out. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. It's some history there, no doubt about it. Now, Rocket Reindeer has an interesting question. Asked, does Thomas have any thoughts on how he sifts between authentic stories and high-profile hoaxes? Now, Rocket is from British Columbia. I actually just exchanged some stuff with him the other day, or him or her, saying that there's a lot of cool stories out in British Columbia, and I believe it.
There is. I'm not naive to believe that everyone I've ever interviewed was telling me the truth. Okay? I'm inclined to believe 2/3 of the ones I actually made reports on, they themselves actually believe they saw something. But you always got to remember, when you're dealing with an eyewitness and you're interviewing an eyewitness, there's only 3 possibilities. Only 3. 1, they saw a Sasquatch. 2, they mistook somebody or something for a Sasquatch. Or 3, they're lying. Okay, those are the only 3 possibilities. And unfortunately, one of the worst things that ever happened to this research is the internet, because it is a soapbox for every snake oil salesman out there. And you can do your research today and make up a story and sound totally convincing. However, I find that most people make the same mistake that people making up stories did back in the 70s. They can't stop themselves. They always got to go make it a little bit more exciting, a little bit more frightening. And it isn't too long when you're experiencing this and talking to people, the red flags start to go off.
Right.
It's half a mile away, but he tells you such details, so he saw it only 20 yards away. That kind of thing. Look at me, 40 years of research, going out trying to find it all the time. And I may possibly have had a sighting once, possibly. We get people coming on here all the time saying, I've had 15 encounters with Sasquatch. I see them every time I go out my back door. Remember the Carter Coy farm in North Carolina there, She was going on, she was feeding them garlic. She had names for them. They had a language recorded. Never got a single picture of one, but she did take a picture of a stick and drop. That kind of thing. And researchers, a lot of what I politely refer to as Ivan Marx syndrome goes on today, That's people who may have been involved with something authentic once, and they're the center of attention for a while. But when that attention dies down, they find the attention was more important than the subject. So they start making stuff up to remain the center of attention, which works for you until you get caught. And in my opinion, I'm again stressing it's only my opinion, the latest best example of that in Canada is Todd Standen.
I was just going to ask that, actually.
Yeah. I don't believe a word he says, but that's just my opinion. Yeah.
Sure. And that's funny you mentioned that. Leon actually asked, one of his questions was, Thomas, would you mind explaining the Ivan Marx syndrome? So I'm glad you addressed that.
Ivan Marx was the first example of this I ever knew. He was back in the old days. He was involved in the Bosberg cripple and things like that.
Yeah.
He tried to fake a film saying it showed the Bosberg cripple and was either he or his wife or a friend in a suit. It was very badly done. And he tried to fake a number of films over the years. He was a nice guy personally, but he was an absolute yarn spinner.
Right.
He loved to tell a story and be the center of attention. That was Ivan Marx. So anyone like that that's coming after him, I refer to it as Ivan Marx syndrome.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. That's certainly, I think, been a lot of people like that. Maybe some that they have an authentic experience and they get frustrated, so they feel the need to create something to try and convince people and hoax. I don't know. I mean, it's
right. A lot of people who call themselves researchers today aren't researchers at all, really. They're more like religious leaders trying to push a faith.
Right. That's I think
the way to go. Yep.
Leon would definitely start talking about, the pathology of these people, and it's very interesting to actually look into that then once you start digging a little bit deeper into that. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Now, let's see here. David Clark asks, hello, Alex and Thomas. What are your thoughts on the Paul Freeman footage?
Which one? Paul Freeman had a couple of films.
I would assume the most famous one where there he goes one.
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah. Again, I'm only expressing my opinion. Okay? I knew Paul Freeman. I knew him well. Hell of a nice guy. One of the nicest individuals I've ever met. If the world was filled with Paul Freemans, the world would be a better place. But for some reason on this subject, Ivan Marx syndrome. Okay? Ivan Marx syndrome. I believe, and again, this is just me expressing my opinion, I believe the Freeman footage of there he goes is probably his son Dwayne, who was a real big man, just like him, wearing a suit. That's what I believe. Yeah, I could be wrong. A lot of people disagree with me.
Sure. But
I knew Paul Freeman. I talked to people when he first got notoriety in 1982, I believe it was, near Walla Walla, when he was a watershed ranger. Had an encounter, and I went and talked to people who were involved in that, Arden and stuff, and they told me Freeman had nothing but Bigfoot on his mind from the day he started the job. And he said, I had people doing that route, never reported anything. Freeman goes out there a couple of times, encounters Sasquatch. Take it for what it's worth. But Freeman, he would find twisted trees. He even admitted to faking tracks on one or two occasions.
Right.
So Freeman, like I said, God, what a great man. As a human being, you couldn't ask for better.
Sure.
For some reason, on this subject, Ivan Marx syndrome. Right.
Yeah, something I wanted to mention about Ivan Marx. I just skipped my brain as we were talking about it, but I'm not sure if this is true. If I mean, you're the person to ask. Was he involved with Biscardi at some point? Because I do recall something about him.
Ivan Marx?
Yeah, there was some kind of involvement, or no?
I don't believe so, because I believe...
was that after his time?
Yeah, I think Marx died now about, how many years ago now? He was still alive in the early 2000s, but I can't remember the date of his death. Biscardi was after him. I don't know if there was something between him and Biscardi. I never really heard about it. I know Biscardi was involved with the Georgia boys and their body in the fridge, which turned out to be a very good Halloween costume from this company in California that they had stuffed with pig guts or cow guts and frozen in the fridge. All you had to do was look at the face and you could recognize it. They sell this costume in this company in California.
Right.
Yeah. But Biscardi, as soon as I heard he was involved, I kind of suspected and wrote the whole thing off. But again, that's just me and my own prejudices. Once you hoax, you're as far as I'm concerned, your reputation's gone.
Yeah, it's once a hoaxer, always a hoaxer.
Yeah. But then again, like I said, good thing we didn't have that attitude, or the Patterson Gimlin film would have been dismissed.
Yeah.
Because of Roger Patterson. I mean, it was an absolute stroke of genius for Roger to take on his Bob along. Yeah.
So I did a little search here, and I think there's this film, I guess, that Biscardi was in or did, called In the Shadow of Bigfoot, and it's listed on Amazon as having an Ivan Marx, spelled not M-A-R-X, but M-A-R-K-S. So I don't know. That's maybe where I had the...
I know. It doesn't sound like Ivan Marx was M-A-R-X, I believe. Yeah. So
yeah, maybe that was a mistaken association. But either way, for some reason, I connected the two. But you know, as you mentioned, Biscardi has plenty of baggage. We'll put it that way.
Last I heard, Ivan, before he passed away, Ivan was back in California somewhere. But I don't know. I really never had much contact with him after 1982. So yeah, because every time, again, just like Freeman, as an individual, is a fine guy, kind of guy you'd be proud to call your buddy, but for some reason in this, he just loved telling stories, you know.
Yeah.
And he got, and it paid off for him too, because they even made a movie about him. I can't remember what it was called, Shadow of Bigfoot or something like that. I can't remember. But it was Ivan Marx narrating his hunt on his property. Of course, he's portraying himself like a Daniel Boone. He has a pet mountain lion with cubs in the backyard and things like that. Goes up to, and he never ever said Bigfoot calmly. Every time he mentions Bigfoot in the movie, he yells out the name. I saw it. It was Bigfoot.
Very eccentric, yeah.
Yeah. And he goes all the way up to Alaska, and he ends up getting footage of the Sasquatch in a swamp near his backyard in the first place. So, you know, which was another hoax Ivan Marx film. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I think those pictures of those films have been around for quite a while.
Yeah.
If you Google search Bigfoot, it's always one of the ones that pops up, or search it online. But so back to the discussion about the body, physical evidence, tactical Bigfoot research. That's Mike. How you doing, man? He asked, if you could not get the full body, what do you take? And there's been a couple comments, people saying head, foot, you know, whatever you can carry.
In my opinion, head, hands, and feet. But any part will do. Heads, hands, or feet, especially the head.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. It's easy to think about now, but let's say you're out, 2 hours into a hike or somewhere in this wooded area. It's like, what would you do in the moment?
Yeah.
Hopefully, stay collected.
Could I pull the trigger if I actually had one of my rifle sights? I don't know. 25 years ago, I would have said no problem. But now, would I want to shoot one? I know. I'm fully aware that scientists has to get what scientists always demand. If I got a real good look, close-up look at the Sasquatch, I just might be happy that I was right. And the hell with it all.
Right.
The hell with it all, and leave it at that, because I don't think the Sasquatch is particularly endangered, but I don't believe there's a hell of a lot of them. I always kind of went along with maybe one Sasquatch for every 100 bears in any given area. So they're that low in population. It's obviously not a good idea to go out and shoot a bunch of them. But if they're so low in population that killing one could terminate the species, well, they're doomed anyway. It's going to happen sooner or later. Yeah.
Right. Now, on that note, there is a question, or I guess a comment here by Splash Boudreau asking, Alberta world-renowned taxidermist claims that hunters witnessed Sasquatch filling the carcass of a dead creature with rocks and submerge the body in the Muskeg. I don't know if that's a river. I think somebody mentioned that could be Ken Walker. I don't know. I know I think there's a recent documentary about him, if I'm not mistaken.
You got me. I've never heard the story.
Yeah,
I've never heard the story, but it's just another story.
Yeah,
there's a body, but nothing to back it up with. Yeah.
Kevin had an interesting comment. He said, I met Todd Standing. He might be full of it, but he's real convincing when you talk to him in person. Probably why Les Stroud trusted him to be a partner on his show. Interesting. Do you find that these people often that have this sort of Ivan Marx syndrome, or they tend to be people that try to convince you, or they seem to be convincing? They're good salesmen, basically?
More than likely. People looking for their fame and fortune. And Sasquatch is easy to hoax. The woods are right there. Go out and do it. It's easy to hoax. I mean, a lot of people I find who call themselves researchers. I know I'm well known in this. Okay, I know I'm well known, and I guess I'm respected. But it took years to do that. And I did it the old-fashioned way. I researched, I talked, I investigated, I wrote books.
Right.
Where some people are in a hurry. They want to be famous right now.
Yeah.
They want to pay off right now. And Todd Standing, in my opinion, is just someone who's trying to get something to pay off. And he's taking big risks, like suing the BC government and losing.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think he's got money problems because I don't think his homemade documentaries he's been involved with have paid off like he hoped they would. And as far as I know, he's having financial problems. But again, I don't follow Todd Standing around. I've got better things to do. Yeah, I've got better things to do.
It is interesting. I find that, I guess there was that, I never saw the documentary that I think he did or was done about him that was on Amazon or Netflix or one of these big sort of services. But I know a lot of people who weren't even into Sasquatch in this field. That's one of the first things they would see, which I think is sort of unfortunate because then it may lead them down a path of following somebody like that. And I mean, I don't know. I'm not here to tell you who to follow or who not to follow, but you would hope that you get a little more holistic.
Well, the one he did with Les Stroud. Les is in the tent by himself and he hears all these yips and yowls. And he said, no one knew I was there. I said, of course someone knew you there. Todd Standing knew you were there. He's the one that dropped you off.
Right.
He knew exactly where you were.
Yeah.
So again, I'll just say what I've always said. I don't believe a word the man says, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. We'll finish up with the talk about Todd Standing. But I'd be interested to have Les on. I've been trying to contact him. Maybe get his side of the story would be interesting. But moving on, Guy 15. We'll take a few more questions here. But Guy 15 says, I always wonder if the red eyes report people report indicates that they are telling a hoax because red eyes don't happen in nature. Do you think that Sasquatch could actually have red eyes? Yeah, definitely an interesting question.
Guy 15, let me tell you something. Before August of 2019, I was in your camp. I thought red eyes did not happen in nature. I've seen eyes reflection of all kinds, almost always white, yellowish, pinkish, a little there. But at 3 o'clock in the morning in 2019, going up the east side of Harrison Lake, with my high beams on, I saw 2 what I took to be red reflectors on an old fence post or something ahead of me on the right-hand side of the road. When I got a little closer, they turned away. Now, I'm not saying this was a Sasquatch, okay, because all I saw was the eyes, and they were bright red. And I had to eat crow because for 40 years I've been saying, people who report red eye glow, why are they trying to make it sound scary or something like that? That was always a red flag to me when people add red eye reflection. But I saw it myself, August of 2019, for the first time in 40 years of looking. I had to eat a lot of crow because it is possible for some, I don't know why, but for sometimes eyes of wildlife to reflect red. I never ever thought I'd see that, and I finally did. And I found out the hard way. Not saying it was a Sasquatch, because quite frankly, they were only about raccoon height off the right-hand side of the road. However, when I stopped there, there's an 8-foot ditch there.
Right.
Yeah, but I didn't see where it went or where it disappeared to. If you go to my Facebook page and go down near the bottom, you'll see a follow-up video on that investigation on that. But again, what was his name? Guy 15? Who asked that question?
Guy 15, yeah.
Believe me, man, I was in your arm, just like you, up until August of 2019. Then I saw it myself. Yes, sometimes in nature, eyes can reflect red. I never believed that, and I never thought I'd see it myself, but I finally did.
Yeah, it's interesting. The only thing I've ever seen kind of reddish were alligator eyes. That's obviously not an animal either of us are used to in our wheelhouse. But I think it's the reports that don't have a source of light, where there isn't eye shine, where it's just like sustained red. That's really weird.
Well, eye shine is eye reflection. It could be starlight, it could be moonlight, it could be a lot of things. I've seen owls with eyes that glow like little flashlights, and there isn't a light around.
Right.
And I'm not shining one. I had one guy who had a Sasquatch sighting in his backyard, not too far from here, and he said its eyes. He didn't say they were red. He said they were rather white. But he said, I wasn't shining a light on, but they were glowing there. I said, well, you're standing out in your little porch in the back, right? Right. The kitchen window, were the inside lights on there? And he said, yeah, that's what was reflecting in the eyes. That's what was reflecting in the eyes. Yeah, but again, I just want to, the last question. Yes, sometimes animals do have reflective red eyes, and I never would have believed that until I saw it myself.
Right. Yeah, so we're getting a lot. Yeah, it's definitely interesting now. It's not something you usually think of. I think with just like you said, the red, you see all sorts of other colors, but red is really it's freaky. I think red is that glowing red eyes is something that's associated with, the devil, horror movies, that kind of stuff. So people see that maybe get a little more disturbed than just seeing yellowish eyes. I don't know.
Well, I was never a total agnostic on it. I just going by my own experience. Every time I saw an animal's eyes reflecting, it was white, sometimes a little pinkish, orangey color, but never bright red. Never bright red. And I've seen animal reflections of all types, of all sizes, and all times. Until 2019 in August, I never saw bright red reflective eyes before. I couldn't believe it, but there it was. Yep. Right.
Yeah, man, it's definitely something that kind of it's interesting. It really is. But all right, anyway, moving on. Let's see here. Somebody was asking if there's going to be a Q&A. I mean, this is the Q&A. Quick Witty asked, does Thomas believe there is a cover-up? I wasn't a believer till the piece of Brushy Creek hidden camera footage. Very convincing. People keep mentioning this. I have no idea what that is.
You mean government cover-up? No, I don't believe the government is trying to cover up the existence of the Sasquatch. I think that's just chasing your tails conspiracy theory stuff. To me, no. I think the government doesn't care until it's proven to exist by, zoological and by scientists, because the first thing the government's going to do is ask the scientists. And no, they just simply don't care.
Right.
They just don't care. As far as they're concerned, officially, it's just a part of Western Canadian or North American folklore and mythology. Yeah. And as long as it remains in that realm, that's the attitude they're going to have on it.
Yeah, and I've always said, too, I think you look at the way the media still treats the subject. I mean, why would anybody take it? Anyone who's into it is still treated as being a quack or a weirdo. So it's kind of, they're in a sense just putting out what they want people to think in general about this subject. So what's the need to have helicopters swooping in on every single person seeing one? It just seemed like a waste of resources. There's easier ways to kind of turn your head the other way, I suppose. All right, I think we'll just take one or two more questions. Even though Dave was spamming the comments earlier, I will take a question from him. If someone offered you the opportunity to make contact with the Sasquatch Bigfoot people, would you go? If not, why not? I kind of know the way he's wording the question, what he's, the Bigfoot people kind of thing.
Yes. But if they're not there, you're going to have some explaining to do.
And have you ever had people tell you, I know exactly where they are?
Oh, more times than I can count. Oh, there's Sasquatch all over this hill or this mountainside. Come out here for a week. I'll guarantee you'll see something. Oh, yeah, okay. Come all the way to Bella Coola, from Calgary, Alberta, I drove like 12 hours straight, and I was just stopping for gas just to find out the sighting was a week before.
Right.
Yeah. No. Yeah, more times than I can count. There's always someone out there who claims to have the hard evidence, but they can never back it up.
Sure.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be looked into.
Right.
Now, but if you're lying and hoaxing me, people are going to know it.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, I feel like at events, I always hear there's that one person who shows up and says, I know where the Sasquatch are. I'll take you to them. And it's always a little bit of a weird thing to have to deal with. Now, quick question, but Mountain Chief asks, what is Tom smoking? Is that a pipe?
Well, smoking? Who's smoking? I'm not. Yep, that's it. I've been a pipe smoker the last 30 years. I smoke cherry Cavendish when I can find it.
That's great.
Yeah,
very classy. Now,
but don't start. Don't start. It's bad habit. Don't start. Don't do it. I'm a dummy for doing that. Don't do it.
There you have it. Now let's take one more question. Pesty asks, what does Thomas think of the British Columbia Triangle theory? Some people have theorized that this is a triangle, or this triangle have a big population of Sasquatches.
Well, I've heard of that, but I find like out here, you go outside any town and you're in the wilderness, you're in Sasquatch country. I've had sighting reports just down the road here. And I've had sighting reports miles back in the bush. It seems to me most encounters happen more often than not when they come near people rather than the other way around. You get a lot of small communities where there's no reports for weeks or months and sometimes years. Then all of a sudden, for a period of about 10 or 12 days, several people have encounters. And they stop almost as suddenly as they had started, almost as though one had been in the area, hung around for a while, and then moved on. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you entertain one more question?
I'll entertain as many questions you want to put to me.
Okay. Here's one from Bill Mers, who asked Thomas, the Chapman incident, very credible report, huh?
That's another one of the classic tales. 1941, Ruby Creek. Yes, I believe that it's probably a true story because of the circumstances surrounding it. It happened in 1941. Well, I'm assuming everyone knows it. Right? The Ruby Creek incident, the Chapman house.
That's the one with, there's a famous sketch of what looks like a female Bigfoot, I believe.
No, that's William Rowe, you think.
That's the William Rowe. Okay.
That's another classic tale. It was a cabin. Miss Jenny Chapman was doing the dishes in this little shack on the banks of the Fraser River. And one of her three kids came in saying, Mommy, there's a strange looking cow coming out of the woods. And she went out and looked. She didn't see a cow. She saw a teak hair-colored, big, hairy man basically coming out of the trees and walking across the field towards the house. She covered the kids with a blanket and went running down the trail along the riverbank through the cemetery and up along the CPR line and ran into three men who came back and investigated. When they found the line of tracks, went through a potato patch and crossed the tracks, circled the house, appeared to enter the house at one point. Then it entered the lean-to in the side of the house where there were barrels of salted salmon. It ripped open the barrel, probably sampled some of the salmon, didn't like the taste, scattered the contents of the barrel all over the place. Then the tracks seemed to go to the riverbank where they assumed it was probably trying to wash the salty taste out of its mouth. And then they went back, crossed the field, crossed the CPR line, and disappeared into the mountains. It's one of the classic tales known as the Ruby Creek incident. And if you read some of the older books, like the Ivan T. Sanderson account of this story or the John Green account, you get the impression that the Chapman family abandoned the house after this. That's not quite true. They stayed another week. But something kept coming back. Even though they never saw it again, all of their dogs kept going crazy around 2 and 3 in the morning. And after that, the Chapmans finally abandoned the house. However, other relatives moved into the house and continued to live there. Now, what caused the house to be absolutely abandoned was the last great flood of the Fraser River in 1948 when the property was 3 feet underwater. It was so bad, the local cemetery next to the property, half the graves were disinterred and went down river. It was a real mess. It was a real mess. And since then, they've increased the dikes. The property's still there. It's owned by a family who's a friend of mine. And people who like to come up here and want to see this classic spot, I'll give them a call and I'll show it to you. Just like I'll show you tunnel number 4 and the clip where Jacko was captured.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've seen those pictures on your website. And for folks who are, looking to look into Thomas's work, I have his website linked below. Great place to check out, not only the stuff about his books, but other appearances he's done. Definitely a fantastic researcher. Now, here's a question from the Bluff Creek podcast or Project podcast. Asks, what does Thomas think of the Skookum imprint?
You talking about the Skookum Cast?
Yeah, the Skookum Cast. Obviously,
I think it's pretty well been proven that to be an outlaw.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably the logical explanation for it. Yeah. Maybe not, but at first I thought it was really something. And then I started looking into it and talking to people. Like John Green was totally convinced on it. He even had a copy of it made. And maybe they're right, but I think probably the more logical explanation was it was an alcohol. Yeah, that's what I like. I like investigating. I find other explanations, okay, but it's the ones I can't find other explanations for that keep me intrigued. Yeah,
definitely, and it's good to get to the bottom of something. I mean, you still have found an explanation for something.
That's the difference between a researcher or investigator and a religious leader trying to push a faith.
Yeah, that's what we're getting some comments, as I often do, saying, "Oh, your researchers are dummies because you don't believe there's a cover up." And obviously, they know the truth. These random YouTube commenters, of course.
Yeah. Well, they just like chasing their tails. So carry on. You've been chasing your tails forever, and you continue to do so.
Right.
If it wasn't Sasquatch, they'd be probably in the UFO field. They're probably, and of course, a lot of people now think Sasquatch is boring, so they have to invent something. They have to get after things that are more exciting, like dogmen, skinwalkers, shapeshifters, all kinds of weird, wonderful things.
Oh yeah, bring in the whole paranormal smorgasbord into
absolutely,
topic. But all right, I think we'll take one more question here from Mike at Tactical Bigfoot Research. He asked, "What was Thomas's most frightening experience bigfooting?"
The worst thing that ever happened to me in the bush when I was looking was in August of 1986 when I was chased up a tree by a grizzly bear.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. There had been clear-cut areas. This is on, I believe it's Route 93 between Lillooet and Mount Curry. In 1986, it was still a dirt road. It wasn't paved then. And there were all kinds of clear cuts. And I was up there on the hillside looking at one. And there were batches of trees that were left alone because they weren't big enough, right? And I was right by a batch of these smaller trees when I heard it before I saw it. Of course, where all the stumps were where they'd been logging, all the undergrowth had grown up, right? So you could just see this wake of something coming down. It came down the road, and it was a bear, and it was charging. And, oh, by the way, my rifle was back in the truck. So,
that's great.
Yeah. So I started scrambling up these trees, and I got about, 7-8 feet up, and it pulled me back down. It grabbed the small pack on my back, and it pulled me back down. Why it didn't grab my legs that day, I don't know, but I'm not complaining. Okay. And it pulled me down. And for some reason, and again, I'm not complaining, it let go. And I went right back up them trees again. And I got all torn. My shirt was torn up and I got scratches all over my arms. I'm looking down. And that's when I realized it was a grizzly bear, not a black bear. Oh. Because it was jet black in color, like a black bear. But then I saw the blunt face, the long claws, the hump behind the head. And I knew it was a grizzly. And I kind of thank God it was a grizzly because they don't like to climb. Black bears can climb like monkeys.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he huffed and puffed and popped his teeth for about 10, 15 minutes down there. And then he went back off the way he went. About an hour and a half later, I came out of the tree. And I went back to the truck. And I didn't realize until I got up to the truck that I was bleeding. And I had these 2 small puncture marks in my my middle of my back that required about 3 stitches each. Oof. But you look at the pack I was carrying, I still keep that to remind me that we're not the top of the food chain. It's eviscerated. But the only part that got through to my flesh, through my shirt and the pack, were these 2 little puncture marks. It was the scariest day of my life, and it was the luckiest day of my life.
Wow.
Yeah. That was the scariest thing that ever happened to me looking for Sasquatch. That was early August, 1986, which I call the best year of my life because I had a whole bunch of accumulated leave I had to use up in the Army. And I basically had May to October off with pay. And I spent the whole time in the bush looking for Sasquatch.
That is cool.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty glad we don't have to deal with grizzlies out this way.
Well, they're if you do the right thing and act properly, sure. You'll probably have no problem. But you got to remember, in North America, wilderness is wilderness. It's Absolutely. Not a park. There is a chance you could run into something that may want to eat you.
Oh, right.
It's a beautiful, wondrous place to explore and visit, but it is wilderness, and it's not for the timid.
No,
So
definitely not.
yeah. So be prepared. All you can do is your best. And if you're destined to be a tragedy, it's going to happen. That's the way I look at it anyway. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, we see a lot of these viral videos of people being chased by mountain lions and, encountering things like that out in the wilderness. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. I was recently in Florida and did some camping out in the national forest there, and it's completely different than what I'm used to in the Northeast, of course. You have hogs down there. You have alligators that may be sleeping near your camp, poisonous snakes, Florida panthers, bears, very, very aggressive bears. Well, not as aggressive bears, but they definitely are used to raiding campsites down there. So wherever you go in North America, I think there's something out there that may try to kill you. Around here, it's mostly moose for us here. I'd say the most dangerous around here our black bears aren't too bad. But I still wouldn't want to mess with one on the wrong day. So
when I say black bears climb like monkeys, they go up the trunk of trees real quick.
Yeah, they do.
They don't swing from tree to tree or branch to branch, of course. They could go up a tree real quick, but they're kind of clumsy coming down.
Oh, yeah. I think there's that one famous video of a hunter in a tree stand, and the bear kind of scoots up in a few seconds right up to him and is just looking at him, staring at him, and he's just sitting there paralyzed. What am I supposed to do right now?
Yeah, well, grizzly bears can too, but they don't like to.
Right.
So they're much less likely to do it. And I think a big reason why black bears do is to get away from grizzlies.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He told some pretty crazy grizzly bear stories. I know from up in some of the areas he's been in. I mean, I've only seen them up in Alaska. I've never really had the chance to interact with them, I guess. And I hope to keep it that way, even when I do visit the PNW and British Columbia at some point. So definitely. But yeah, it's been awesome to have you on so far, man. I really appreciate you coming on.
No problem. You want to ask me some more?
I did want to just read a comment from Jordan. He says, great show, Alex. Thank you, Jordan. Thanks for tuning in. And awesome. He says, I remember checking out Thomas's books in the libraries when I first got into this field. Highly respect him and his passion. Awesome. And he's been in the field for a while. I mean, he's a young guy like me now doing the filmmaking thing, but he was in it when he was in middle school and younger, just like me.
Well, you young guys are the future. I mean, I'm almost 60. I don't know how much time I got left, but it's you young guys now who are handing the torch. You got to carry it on, man. And all I could say is, please stick to the facts, never deviate from the facts, and use a healthy dose of common sense.
Sure.
And don't go there with preconceived notions. Like either way. You're investigating, you're researching, you're trying to find an answer, right? You're trying to find an answer.
Absolutely. Now let's end with this one question though. This is a personal question I had that I didn't get to earlier.
Sure.
What is do you have a favorite encounter that you've been told over the years? Not one of these ones that's probably well known. Is there some story that somebody's confided in you or told you that just kind of stuck out to you and was really interesting in British Columbia?
Yeah, I have two favorites. My absolute favorite has got to be the Chilliwack River find in late August of 1986. And that is when I was told that an American couple had just encountered a Sasquatch in a little campground along the Chilliwack River. And I happened to be in Chilliwack at the time. And I heard this story from a man in a coffee shop. And he said, they're probably still there because I was there a day ago. And I went rushing down there, and I drove into what was the exit right in the entrance. And I ran into a red pickup truck with a camper on it coming out with Utah plates. And I looked at him, and I said, excuse me, folks, but have you heard of any strange animal being here? And the wife said, oh, you're talking about the Bigfoot. And and the husband just flashed a look at her as if to say, shut up.
Yeah, right.
But after calming them down, I managed, and if I had been 15 seconds later, I would have missed them. And it turned out they were an American couple from Salt Lake City, Utah, Mr. and Mrs. Harris. They were senior citizens back then. I don't even know if they're still alive now. But they were visiting British Columbia because this is 86, and that was Expo year. So they spent a week in Vancouver going to Expo. And their plans was to camp all along rivers and stuff like that, end up in Banff, Alberta before heading back across the border and heading home. And they spent a couple of days in this little camp. It's now called Riverside Recreation. I don't think it was named in '86. And they were fishing in the river, and all he remembered was looking at his wife, and she's pointing back up to their campsite with her mouth agape. And he looked around, and he said they had a little stringer, gill stringer of 4 or 5 trout on, the gill stringer that was hanging on a hook on the tree that he was going to clean, and they were going to cook for dinner. And he said this gorilla thing was sniffing the trout. And he said, I hung that way above my head, but it was looking down on them. And it just grabbed the stringer and pulled it off this hook. This hook was actually made for a lantern to hang on, but they had the stringer hanging on it. And it pulled it, and they could hear the thing go, so they go, and it took off the fish across the campground, crossed the main road, and disappeared along what we later found out to be Bald Beard Creek, which is a creek that flows into the Chilliwack River. So I was lucky to catch them before they left, and they told me the whole story. And I went looking on the other side of the main road, which was a dirt road back then along the banks of Bald Beard Creek, and it was me who found the tracks. The witnesses never saw them. I found the tracks, and I cast 2 of them. And in total, and this was probably the incident best known track find I'm associated with, because there was in the ferns and the grass, there was, I counted 112.
Wow. And
at one point along some big trees, it didn't make any sense because they were all over the place. And I sort of theorized that maybe the thing was meandering around trying to see if it was being followed. But then the trail again went out to a rock slide area on the side of Ford Mountain, and that's where the trail disappeared. I spent 3 days there trying to find where this trail had gone off in this rock slide area, but I never found it, and I never found the fish stringer either. But as soon as the Chilliwack River find, it's probably my favorite one, and it's the one that convinced me that not to give up on the Sasquatch, because I was under immense pressure from my ex-wife at the time to put the Sasquatch on the back burner and concentrate on more important things. Right? But that did it for me, and there was no way I was going to do that. So and that's known as the Chilliwack River find, late August 21st, 1986. That's probably my favorite.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. British Columbia sounds amazing. I've never been, unfortunately, but I'd love to get out there and just to appreciate the nature. Now, Leon says, Thomas, thanks for your ear the other day regarding the report we investigated. Very cool.
You're welcome, Leon, and stick to your guns. You were right. And if they don't like it, too bad.
Awesome. Great to have some great researchers like yourself still in the community. Hey, you're almost like a bridge between the old guard that many of them are sadly no longer with us into the 21st century, and as we go along.
One time I was the new snot-nosed guy that they didn't know if they trust. Now I'm the old guard. I mean, God.
I guess we've all been
really
there.
Flies, man. Time really flies.
Oh, it's crazy. It's still, I mean, I don't know. It still feels like the 1990s were just the last decade, but here we are, closer to 2030.
I remember the 70s like it was yesterday.
Yeah, crazy. Well, awesome. It's been great having you on. An honor to have you on, and keep up the good work. That's all I can really say, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Stick to the facts, never deviate from the facts, and have a heavy dose of common sense.
Absolutely. Words to live by, everyone. Well, thank you guys all for your questions, as always. It's been good to be back after a week or two off here. Great to just have everyone on, and some great questions, as always. As for next week's show, I will be announcing that. We're still working out the details, but we've got some cool guests coming up a week after that. Amy Boo of the Project Zoo Book, and then we've got John Horrigan, who's a friend of mine who's researched Bigfoot and all sorts of weird stuff. Back in the 90s, he got out of it when the internet started, so it'll be interesting to talk to him. It's kind of the internet versus the pre-internet era. I think that's definitely interesting. Should be fascinating. But thank you guys again. We'll see you next week then, guys. Everyone have a good rest of your week, and stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.